I will now invite my panelists one by one. My dear colleague, dear scholar, Mr. Esat Zaman. Again, another distinguished scholar, Mr. Fatih Savaşan. And Mehmet Babacan, our next distinguished scholar. Welcome again. I will do a brief introduction and I will give the floor to Mr. Esat Zaman. So Mr. Romis's introduction and says, let's not use the word capitalism anymore because it's disrupted, and he says let's use the word market. Market builds freedom and also builds wealth. So wealth and freedom is built by market, and it's a system that does that. So he says it's the most appropriate system to the human nature, because human nature always goes towards wealth and freedom. But a lot of philosophers, including Muslim ones, say, and they basically object to this, and they discuss if there is such a thing as human nature or human way, or do humans only have history? And talking about human nature and the capitalist order and the future of everything, let's see what my panelists will have to say. Mr. Esat Zaman has some really important works. Similarly, Mr. Fatih Savaşan, one of the leading figures in terms of economical studies in Turkey, and also Mehmet Babacan as well. He has a lot of important works. All of these panelists contributed a lot. So now I will give the floor to my scholars here so that they can discuss the future of the capitalist economic world order.
I wanted to say that this question, what will happen, is a question which comes from an epistemology, a theory of knowledge, which says that the future is predictable, so we can tell what will happen. But actually we don't have that. From Islam, this question, what will happen, makes no sense, because the future is determined by my action and by your action. So the question is what you are going to do and what I am going to do. And that will determine what will happen in the future. So it's not that we are spectators, we are participants in the game. And because we are participants, this question of, like you're in a football match and you say, what will happen? Well, it depends on how hard you work. Whether you win or you succeed, it will depend on how you play. So, okay, let's go to the next slide. Before that, the title, okay, this is fine. The objectives of this presentation is that for many decades, people who argue for political Islam have been saying that our goal is to get controls of the government so that we can implement the Sharia. This is not a good plan of action. The real enemy for Islam is capitalism. The state is a tool of capitalism. And so state capture will not help us very much because it doesn't actually address the real enemy. Changing capitalism is a difficult matter, and it's different from capturing the state. So first part is to state that this strategy, political Islam, capturing the state, is actually counterproductive. We need to work in a different way in order to create a grassroots alternative to capitalism. Okay, next slide. Next. So we have two parts. The first is to explain why state capture will not work. So one of them is the historical experience. We have been trying this for decades, and it has not worked. A lot of blood and struggle and effort and lives have been used in trying to get control of the government without success. The people who have devoted their lives, inshallah, they are shuhada, and Allah Ta'ala will accept their efforts. But these have not advanced the cause of Islamic revival. And the failure is in the strategy being used. We have not targeted the real enemy, and so the state is very deeply embedded within the capitalist system. So even if you capture the state, you won't be able to create changes. Even in the USA, the leaders of the governments, they cannot implement changes which go against capitalism, even if they want to. Next slide. So there are a few success stories also. There's Iran and Afghanistan. They actually created, with heroic efforts and decades of struggle and sacrifice, they achieved Islamic State. But these states cannot offer a model for the Ummah as a whole, because the Ummah as a whole cannot do that much sacrifice. And these states, they are isolated in the general capitalist models. They have been isolated. They are being forced to follow the capitalist guidelines. So even these success stories show us that this is not the model for the Ummah as a whole. Next. So the problem is that the secular societies which arose in Europe, they arose due to the influence of centuries of religious warfare between Protestants and Catholics. So because of these centuries of battles, which were devastating, the intellectuals of Europe said that we have to get rid of religion, because the religion only caused war. This is European historical experience. It's not universal experience. So that led them to create a secular society. And the secular society says that since there is no God, there is no life after death, there is no judgment day, so the purpose of life is to maximize pleasure in this dunya. And so the goal of achieving power and pleasure, these becomes the goals of life. And because these secular societies managed to conquer the world, so these ideas became powerful even within the Ummah. And the Muslim thought leaders also started to think like this. And for this reason, we have targeted our efforts in the wrong directions. Next slide. So the problem is that when we tried for state capture, the nation states were designed deliberately to keep the Ummah at war with each other. And this has been spectacularly successful. The Muslim states are continuously fighting each other, contrary to the Quran, which tells us that if you stay united, then Allah Ta'ala's help will come. And if you fight each other, then Allah Ta'ala's help will be withdrawn. And so today we have enormous numbers of fights between Muslims and Muslims, because when you try for state capture within an Islamic state, then Muslims will be fighting Muslims. The thing is that jihad can only be carried out against kuffar. So today we have much more than ever in the history of Islam the problem of takfir. One Muslim group calling the other Muslim group kafir. Why? Because that's the only thing that is possible when you have state capture. If you're going to try to make jihad against fellow Muslims, then first you have to declare them kafir. And so this is a serious problem which divides the ummah. So this is one of the disadvantages of the state capture strategy. Next slide. So there are a very large number of misconceptions of secular modernity which we have adopted. And this is why we are looking in the wrong direction to implement Islam. So in Europe, because they said, okay, religion must be put to one side, so then what will be the law? So they said, okay, we have to have the rule of law. The law must be implemented by the state. Political theorist Hobbes started this tendency, and it was very, very influential. So today also Muslims are saying that the implementation of the Sharia from the state is the thing to do. But Sharia is not implemented by the state. The Sharia is implemented inside the hearts of the people, the internal rule of morality. So this idea that the Sharia can be implemented by the state, this is a wrong idea. Again, the state, once the authority of God was dropped, then the authority of man became established. And so the state became the only source of morality. And then it becomes essential to capture the state. According to Hegel, states are the only drivers of history. That the human history is made by states because they are the big actors. But in an Islamic state, the God is all powerful, and the state, the laws of the state cannot be made against the laws of God. So it's a different conception of state. Also, the new goal of life was created by secular modernity, that the human desires are to be worshipped instead of God. Next slide. So that's the criticism of state capture. Now I'm going to present the alternative strategy. So I think that what we need to do is to build Islamic revival from the ground up, not from the top down. Next slide. So Allah Ta'ala says, mentions in Quran in many places that Allah Ta'ala brought together the hearts of the Muslims, and this is a great treasure which we cannot purchase. And the Sahih Hadith says that the Ummah is like one body, and so if one part hurts, then the whole body hurts. Next slide. So when we look at what the Prophet ﷺ did when he arrived at Medina, today people are saying that he built the state of Medina. This is a misconception. This is a projection of modernity onto ancient history. Nation states were formed 2 or 3 centuries ago. There was no such concept before then. What the Prophet ﷺ did was to build a community, the Ummah. And he united the hearts. He used practical strategies. He built the masjid. You meet 5 times a day and you discuss the problems of the Ummah. This is how you build the community. He created the Mawakhat, brotherhood between Ansar and Muhajirin, very pragmatic step to join the hearts of the immigrants with the locals. And also he built international linkages. He sent wafud both within Arabia and outside. Very surprising. You see, you have this nascent community. It's getting started, and he is sending wafud to the Habsha, to Iran, and to other places to invite them to Islam. So both domestic linkages and international. Next slide. Okay, so what are the strategies that I would like to suggest? The first thing is to build communities, to build the local neighborhood communities. Those are the cells of Islam. And from those cells you get the life for the larger picture. In these communities we must promote simplicity and self-reliance, because one of the central characteristics of capitalism is israf and tabzir. Because the capitalism is built on overproduction. Industrial revolution led to capitalism. Industrial revolution means that you produce goods far above and beyond the capacity of people to consume. So then you have to encourage a consumer society. So to counter capitalism, we have to encourage simple lifestyles. We have to build Islamic institutions. I will describe a little bit about that. We have to create global interconnectedness. And we have to make creative adaptations to modernity. One of the problems with our approaches is that one approach is traditional, let's go back to Medina, and the other approach is modern, let's just become like New York or Paris. neither of these is going to work. We can't go back to Medina. We have to take Medina and bring it into modernity. And also we can't abandon Islam and just follow the West, which is, so these two poles are, neither of them are functional. Next slide. Okay, so how do we build communities? We have existing infrastructure. There are masajid all over the Islamic world. In the masjid, you have masjid committees that take care of finances. So expand the responsibilities. Today, in my masjid, you go and you make salat and you come back. You don't know who is the person on the right-hand side, and you don't know who the person on the left-hand side. But actually, this is not the purpose of the masjid. Meet 5 times a day. You get to know each other. You learn about your problems. According to the hadith, if there is somebody hungry within 40 houses on the right or on the left, then even your prayer is not acceptable. But we don't know what's happening in the house next door today because of modernity. Modernity is individualistic. Everyone think only about himself, don't worry about your neighbor. And today, this is the effect of capitalism that we have to fight. So I think that a practical suggestion is that we should take these masjid committees and expand their role and responsibility. Make sure that there's no one hungry. Think about the problems of the neighborhood. Try to create self-reliant neighborhoods. Try to build your own agriculture, or for urban communities, we can pair them with take an urban community, pair them with a rural community. That will be a win-win solution. Next slide. So we should try to, it is the community which builds the norms. When children grow up, how do they live? What lifestyle they adopt? That depends on their parents and on their community. They look at their neighborhood. So if everybody is following simple lifestyles, they will learn to live simple. If everybody is following luxurious lifestyles, then they will also learn to do that. So we can use these communities to build Islamic norms. We should try to promote self-reliance, grow your own food and energy. That makes you independent, and that allows you to counter capitalism. Otherwise, if you're dependent on capitalism to provide you with goods, then it's very hard to counter capitalism. Instead of jobs are actually designed to create human resources, people who function within the capitalist models, and to strengthen capitalism. So we should think, instead of jobs, we should think about service. How can we do service to our own community and to the ummah? If you do productive service, Allah Ta'ala will provide compensation. That is, if the real resources to take care of the community are there, then you don't need external help. And this is basically one of the critical elements of capitalism. Global capitalism keeps countries like Pakistan and dependent by ensuring that their economies are producing for raw materials for export, and therefore they need production. They need produced manufacturers from the. Okay. So there are many proposals I have written in detail elsewhere, where it is possible to create local community currencies. It's possible to create international Islamic currencies. There is a misconception that we should create Islamic dinar and dirham based on gold. That's not the right strategy, because actually money is a form of trust. But it is possible to create trust and using Islamic principles in ways that is not possible within the standard capitalist system. We have natural institutional structures built into Islam. The 5 times daily prayer creates the local community. Then the Jummah gathers many neighborhoods. Then the Eidan, one Eid is very large, and the other Eid gathers the whole Ummah. So if we leverage these institutions, we can create a kind of a Ummah which is not dependent on the state. It is a new kind of idea to create a unity, not dependent on the state. Next slide. So the institutions that we need to build The market institution is adversarial. My gain is your loss. The institutions that we wish to create are cooperative. They are a win-win. So, for example, in takaful versus insurance. In insurance, it's a bet, it's a gamble. The insuring firm gains money if you don't have a health problem or a fire, and you gain money if you have one. This creates conflicting interests. The global financial crisis was caused by the fact that the banks stood to gain by the default of the mortgagers. And there is a study by Atif Mia and Amir Sufi which says that if they had musharka, if they had diminishing musharka contracts, the global financial crisis would not have happened, because the interests of the bankers and the mortgagers would have been aligned. They would have been the same. Next slide. Okay, so the critical kind of business, it was mentioned in the introduction that we are talking about market economy, but actually the Islamic market is very different from the capitalist market. In the Islamic market, the job of the business or the firm is to provide service, and you make profits in order to be able to provide services for the long run. Exactly opposed to this, the capitalist firm provides service to make profits. So, if you remember, there is a hadith that the man says that I distributed money to people. So Allah Ta'ala will say that you did this to become famous, so you have nothing here. So if a firm provides service to people, it feeds them bread, but the goal is to make money, then there is nothing for that in the akhirah. But if you charge money because you need money in order to provide more bread, then your goal is service. So innamal a'mal bin niyat, and you will be rewarded. That's why the tujjar will be with the siddiqeen and the shuhada and the salihin, because their niyah is to provide service. So there are many different, once you change this niyah for business to be provision of service instead of making profits, the whole idea of business changes. Next slide. Okay, so building strong local communities is one part, but strong local community cannot survive on its own. There is too much pressure. So we need to link these communities across in order to give them strength and resilience. So this ties back to the concept of asabiya by Ibn Khaldun, but asabiya has to be generalized. Basically, one of the key insights of Ibn Khaldun was that if you have social cohesion, if you have a strong community, and the larger the community is, the stronger it is. So if we build large social groups, if we aim to unite the ummah, we will get the maximum amount of power. If you look at the history, you find that you have feudal lords, and then you have city-states, and then you have nation-states. And so the larger the group, the stronger the political influence. So if we target to create unity of the ummah with bypassing the state, if we go through the state, and mostly the political strategy has been that first let us establish Islam in the state, and we will go on to the ummah. This two-step strategy is actually impossible, because the working for the state will counter the efforts to unite the ummah. So we can bypass the state and go straight for the identity of the ummah. Next slide. Okay, so we have to, this is what I meant by saying we have to creatively adapt to modernity. We can't find our models in the past, and we can't find models in the West. We have to create them, and this has been the case for the ummah. For 1,000 years, the ummah encountered new circumstances and did ijtihad to find the solution which is Islamic in spirit, and changes in form. The Islamic society evolved continuously over time, and today we have same problem. We have to make ijtihad to find a solution to the unity of the Ummah based on Islamic spirit, but creatively adapted to modernity. Next. So, okay, so that's it. There are actually a lot of different initiatives which are already on the ground, which are making use of these ideas in different ways, and we just need to link them and expand them and recognize them and build upon them, and inshallah Allah Ta'ala will guide us out of this current state. Yes, I think that should be the last. Okay. So, inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mati lillahi rabbil alameen. Allah Ta'ala, we ask Allah to guide us out of our current position. Jazakallah.
Thank you hocam. Thank you for your presentation. Şimdi Fatih Savaşan hocamızı.
Now we will invite Mr. Fatih Savaşan.
Good morning, dear friends. Mr. Esad Hoca started with his presentation, and he started by standing up. So I'm going to continue with his, follow his footsteps. I'm going to touch upon some similar topics. While listening to his presentation, I realized we differ in some points of view. Hopefully, at the end of my presentation, you will see where we differ, and I will express where we differ too. The goal of Istanbul Forum is to have discussions, to have negotiations, and to assess the way out of our current situation better. So having different ideas, different opinions is a richness to our forum. Well, speaking about capitalism, we need to keep in mind that in capitalism criticism, we need to be fair. What does that mean? Capitalism, with its changing forms, regardless of where you look at it, it's going to be a history. But when you look at the theory as an institution, it's 250 years structure, or maybe if you go further, 400 or 500 years institution. So if it has such a long experience, we need to accept its resilience, the ability to adapt to the changing conditions. We need to analyze this and we need to consider it. However, on the other hand, with a better system, you can not only provide the continuity, sustainability of the system on its own, but also you can provide prosperity and welfare globally. We need to discuss that. Do we have a remote controls for me to control the presentation? No, it's okay. While discussing about capitalism, criticizing, we can say many things. I divided it into some subsections to talk about what are the positives or negatives about capitalism. What can we say in favor or against of? When we look at the economic outcomes, most of the things that are against capitalism are inequality or injustice. We can have these terms as an umbrella for all of the things that are negative in terms of economies. So when we talk about capitalism, it's about inequality, choosing between inequality and economic growth, and we have prioritized economic growth instead of equality. And why do we have such a system? Why do the theoreticians suggest this? There is a reality, underlying reality. When we grow our economies, although the income distribution is not going to be fair, even the bottom of the income chain are going to have a better life quality. So of course there are some inevitable inequalities, not having the capabilities to meet your physical needs or basic living conditions. This is the basis. This is the base. But when you have income distribution, you can endure it as long as you provide that the bottom can have a life standard. They can make a living, meet their physiological needs, and have an income that where they can meet their minimum living conditions. So yeah, the income distribution is not just, it's injustice. But of course, after Trump won the election, Elon Musk grew his fortune. There are people who make $1 million, $1,000,000 every year, and there are people who are trying to make a living with a minimum wage. But the point here is to have a parallel within the economical growth and injustice and making a living. So the main argument of a capitalism is when you have a growing economy, even if the income is unjust, even if there is an injustice, there will be, even the ones at the bottom of this hierarchy, they will, even if their life standards are better, if they have, that's enough. When we look at the list here, you see we have a big list. So we have to have a factor listing. We have to order them. Of course, with Ehsaas Zaman, we will see what are our differing opinions. We need some motivations, and we need to build systems that can have motivating properties. Of course, we want to be in Jannah, and we hope that we will be in heaven and afterlife with our actions in this life. And almost all of the things that are going to take us to Jannah are more related to what we do for other people instead of what we do for ourselves. As our brother Asad said, there are a lot of hadiths or ayahs, verses from Quran, but we know if you don't pray 5 times a day, you can still be forgiven. But if you treat someone unjustly, then you have no guarantee. Because when you have an impact on someone else's life, and if it's a negative impact, Islam draws the line there. So the impact should be positive, that we should build a mechanism that can facilitate that and facilitate motivation for us. And instead of being complacent and manufacturing for the world or producing for the world, we should create a mechanism that can produce or work for our afterlife and for Jannah. So selfishness part here is, as most of us know, is one of the main qualities of capitalism. Everyone works for their own profit, and the welfare and prosperity of the society also focuses on the welfare. The market tries to maximize its own profit, and the expenditure is hoped to be minimized. But that means using the resources of the society in an effective way, meaning the mechanism is going to have a positive impact. So when you define selfishness as oppressing someone else, you have a different outcome. But if you define it as making someone else's life easier, you have a different outcome. So a company can maximize its profit, but it can also mean that effective use of resources and having better quality production, meaning the mechanism is working in a significant way. So motivation structure is important, in, as well as innovation. Another important quality is to have openness to the innovations, and also distributing the funds, the capital in the having capitalism in certain people, so monopolize them, the capital, and it has two pillars. One is inequality, and the other main pillar is that continues the momentum of the capital. You need to have the access and you need to use it in the innovative products. What does that mean? It means it motivates you to find new ways, new methods, and to find more richness. So Elon Musk never stops, always makes new investments, just as Bill Gates does. We should analyze these approaches very well. Of course, with a mechanism, they gather the richness within their power, but they also promote technological developments and innovation with the same technology. And when we analyze and critique capitalism, there are things that we need to keep in mind and focus on. Inequality is one of them. We should ask the question, if there weren't colonialism, or after the 1400s, if there weren't the colonialism and if there weren't the transfer of not only natural resources but the labor too, and if we didn't have a mechanism that used that cheap labor, if there weren't colonialism, would we have capitalism? We can have different answers to this question, but I can say that historically, although there would be different development areas, but capitalism or a similar system would emerge even if there weren't the effects of colonialism. When you look at the historical role of colonies, we know that they have an important impact in the cheap labor, in growing the park markets, and also increasing the capital, and having a twofold exploitation system. And also fortune inequalities is also related to the capitalism. But would we have capitalism? Yes, we would have wealth inequality, and we would have capitalism in the same way, because the mechanism of the market, or the prices and distribution of the resources and innovation, these are qualities of capitalism, and we would still have a similar system. But if colonialism didn't exist, countries would try to develop themselves and there would be networks of commerce, and technological developments would be facilitated. But all of these things maybe would be more just within the among the countries, and there wouldn't be such a disparity between the development levels of countries. When moving on to the other slide, of course, capitalism could it be developed without colonialism? The answer is yes, probably we would still have capitalism even without colonialism, but there will be a smaller scale of growing, so Western countries would still be developed, but their growing rate would be lower, and the income is distribution both within the countries and among countries would be more fair, just, and different power structures would exist. And from Asia, although we consider it as a military force, we know that Western hegemony still continues. So without colonialism, capitalism could still develop, but there would be a different timeline and a different power dynamics. We can look at it in that way. Another point that I want to address is financial architecture. In the world, there's a financial architecture which is similar to colonialism. Is that so? That's the question that I have. And when we look at the literature in the capitalist theory, so there is a criticism, capitalist criticism, also almost as large as the capitalism literature as well. So there are some discussions that have the opinion that capitalism still in 15th, 15th, 16th, 17th century until the middle of 19th century or 20th century, the mechanism of capitalism is in effect same with colonialism. So the impacts of colonialism continue with the financial architecture of colonialism, meaning the effects or the functions of colonialism are still continuing for Western world as well as world at large. Of course, there are some estimations which tell us that until the Industrial Revolution, approximate income per capita has been stagnant in $19 in the 1,500 years, from $90 to $200. It has increased. But after the Industrial Revolution, when we had the fuel of colonial era, this number grew to $7,000. So in 2,000 years of history, the income could only reach 200 years, but in 200 and 250 years, this income has exceeded $7,000, which is a success in terms of economical growth. But we also know these numbers don't answer our questions in terms of just injustice. On the contrary, they support us. There are some figures here that I want to address. Still, in the developed countries, there's a financial wave, the financial wave that comes from the current or financial movement to the West, with the colonial system's capitals, and the capitalist system continues the same current. And you can see the numbers here with the slides. And here, distinguished friends, we have an Islamic perspective. In terms of Islam, what can we say about Islam? How can we critique it? You can see the list I have created here, especially having an interests, and that feature of capitalism as well as the debt crisis, there are three articles that I have listed. One is the scalability, the other one is innovation limitations, the third one is difficulties in practice. So what does that say about capitalism? We need to build the structures in a way that allow in results the proposals we have are not going to benefit only the Muslims or the good Muslims, but it's going to benefit and serve all humanity and provide to humanity a better alternative. So in our Islamic works we have a framework that not only creates an alternative for Islamic societies. So our proposals consider that the Islamic societies will have good demeanor, they will have good deeds. So Islam itself doesn't have that trust, let's say, that belief in taqwa or in Islamic world. So we should have a system that is going to work regardless of the people's good needs. So if you tell people if you are Muslims, if you tell people you should be Muslims, and if you become good Muslims, then this system is going to work. That is not going to make it unsustainable for your system to work, not only in the Muslim world but in the world at large either. It's not going to be possible for it to be practiced if you have such an approach. As Brother Assad suggested, we should have such an approach, but we have to accept the reality of small communities need a system that is going to make their lives easier, and it's going to increase their resilience against poverty and against exploitation, and we also need to save the Ummah or Islamic world from their current situation. We need a system that is going to save all of us, not only just help smaller societies. Of course, there are many systems, and capitalism is has a liberal perspective, and also there are controlled capitalism models. Capitalism doesn't always has opportunities for the state to intervene in the economies, and in every state there were more social benefits, social helps, and there were more intervening or interventions to the economies, and we are in an era that the state grows. The only thing the capitalism won't give up on is the interest. Interest means a risk transfer of risk. So as a business model, you take that responsibility, and even if when you make profit or when you have a loss, you are going to take that responsibility and you are going to transfer it to someone else, and you're not going to share it. In the Islamic world, the ban on interest gives us a different business model. So it says share the risk. So even in loss or in gain, you should share that risk. But this system gives limitations in terms of economic growth. So our economies may not grow that much, but the opportunity is you won't have economic crisis either. So innovations and economic growth is not going to be increased, but the monopolizing of the capital is not going to happen either. So you won't have the extremes on both positive and negative sides. The crises are going to be in smaller scales, which is a significant gain. And the Islamic models propose us we shouldn't be too demanding in terms of growth, but in the long run it's going to provide prosperity and welfare, and it's going to have a system that has a distribution of wealth. And it's difficult to convince people, and we need to work very hard on it, but we need working mechanism, and these mechanisms should work regardless of the society, regardless if the society is Muslim or Muslims with taqwa or no. We should also understand the importance of the ban on interest, which this is a business model, and when discussing the injustice in terms of wealth distribution or income distribution, we always talk about zakah, and it's always to exist. Even if there is a good system, there will be disadvantaged people, disabled people, or mentally disabled people. There will be people who have psychological traumas, unemployed because of that. So zakat is going to be a mechanism that is going to manage the income inequality, but ban of interest as a business model should be one of the principles in production or manufacturing management. So ban on interest should be a significant principle, and we should study it very well. We need to work on it, and we need working mechanisms, and we should not idealize humanity. And these are my last remarks. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your kind words. Now, if you will, we will have Mehmet Babacan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ben de çok teşekkür ederim.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Of course, after Adem scholar's introduction, I have a few things to say. I am an academician myself, but of course, my studies are not in this field specifically. So, unlike my colleague here, so it's going to be a bit difficult to speak after him. But I have been involved in these subjects. So, to be honest, I actually looked at the keywords in the headline of our panel today, and I focused on those. There are a few notions here that we should focus on, and I think a lot of the attendants guests here will be familiar with it. So, economicization of the world. In the economical theories, this has a place. It's about values, and it's about the changing world, and it's also about usage, not necessarily the usage of resources of the world, but it includes everything, the social aspects and everything, with the history, concrete and non-concrete aspects. So in terms of Islam and its approach, I think it's easier to discuss it under the subject of globalization, but I also wanted to focus on philosophy, as philosophical side of it as well, and it's about the quest for power, and it's about it's about power. I think it's about will to power, as we call it. These are some very abstract concepts that are not easy to discuss and talk about, but I'll try to do my best to convey my opinions to somehow make it into a more concrete speech. Of course, people are at the center of all these things. We also referenced how if humans have a nature, if there is a human nature, or if you only have a history. And of course we get a lot of questions about civilization and humanity that arise from the modernity. And I actually believe that there is a nature to humanity. There is such thing called a human nature. And there's also the guidance, the need for guidance, and it shapes what happens. So also psychologically we have expectations and behaviors. And ultimately, as Mr. Ehsaas Zaman also mentioned, we have mutual behaviors, mutual expectations. And the humanity and the human history is the result of all that. So if we have to build a chain with three sides to it, so we have on one side human nature and human nature to believe, but there's also his guidance that always guides him, and that's the starting point. Secondly, there are also internal and external dynamics shaped by us. Internal dynamics include expectations and also our anxieties, our basic motivations. And connected to that, we have behaviors. Behaviors include habits, cultural behavior, and also learned behavior. And ultimately, you get an output. And that shapes where the world goes, or it shapes how the capitalist order shapes. And people and humans are part of that, but combined, they have an effect. So I also put a lot of importance on the concepts of interaction, because we live in a world of uncertainty. So I focused on corporate economics because of that. I know we have a lot of scholars here who are involved in corporate economics, and I think it will be a great starting point, connecting a lot of us. So you can also approach it from a game theory perspective, or otherwise, I think we are going through an period of uncertainty. And we also believe that different timelines are also flowing in the space-time. And there's also a basis to that. I actually have a book about it, the world we have now and the world that will come after. So in this period of uncertainty, how will the capitalism evolve in the future? So in terms of corporate economics, I think we can use some concepts and we can turn it into tools for us to use, and we can make some assumptions. So we have a lot of scholars here who are involved in these subjects, and also other subjects like history, anthropology, etc. So I looked at those. What Islamic scholars have said in terms of the word uncertainty, and I realized that the word uncertainty is used with other words such in conjunction, such as change and transformation. It was also referenced before, like Ibn Khaldun's Asabiye concept, and how it motivated small groups of people, and how it brought small groups of people together, and how it allowed them to bring forward a productive generation. But also the same Ibn Khaldun also talks about other systems where there are different decadences of rise and fall. And one of the things I get from that is that in terms of these periods of uncertainty, according to Ibn Khaldun, when the cycle goes down, when it is in decline, yes, there's still production, scientific and idea production, but it becomes disintegrated from the society at large, and it becomes a thing for only a small section of the society. And that brings us issues such as income inequality and inequality in wealth distribution. And these things becomes issues, and you lose the dynamics of the society. So I'm not going to go too much into detail when it comes to uncertainty, but you can look at a lot of experts. Armand Alchin, for example, interesting guy, a modern economist. He studied in 20s, 30s, and 40s and 50s, where economics became more and more mainstream. Also, we also have a lot of previous figures as well. So Western people call it evolution. Also, maybe taking inspiration from Darwinist theories. So I actually adopt this approach. We have a lot of economists here. They focus on different aspects like balance analysis, etc. So they focus on optimization issue and they don't think much about the rest. I am also similar, but when you talk about humans, there are a lot of things that you should focus on, like geography, history, and if you don't focus on those aspects of humanity, then what is left? And of course, these are not easy questions and almost like fitna questions. So these kinds of subjects, I think we should think about them in difficult times. So I think it would be thought-provoking to set the stage for discussion and negotiation. And these are really well thought out, but also very difficult questions to ask us. But we don't get a lot of opportunities to think about these things and work on these things. These are like rebats, and I think Muslims need these kinds of rebats. Coming here 2 days, 3 days, even people just coming here visiting, opening up their minds to these kinds of subjects and questions, I think it would be inspiring for all of us. I also would like to talk about a few more things, about people getting more streamlined, one-sided maybe. Thurston Webden, I think, opened an important way in that regard. He also emphasizes how standardizing people, and that's what he criticizes. Another criticism of his is about symbols and consumption. He focuses on consumption. Again, coming back to Ibn Khaldun, the elite part of society losing touch with the reality disrupts and makes the middle class and lower class uncomfortable. And middle class and lower class drives the economy and production. And when they are not happy, it causes a lot of bigger issues, revolutions or other internal conflicts. And ultimately, I think these efforts should be all about understanding human nature and talking about the economicization of the world. We also look at the existing economical order, and we have to look at what that economical order is made up of, like ideas such as free market, price, etc. And these are not these can be taken into consideration independent from people, but I think it's also a normative reality. So also talking about asabiye helps groups until a certain scale. So as the group gets larger and larger, yes, it works again. It can keep people together in a group of people, and it does that with a relatively low cost, so it helps, and the societies can keep going on. But as it comes to a certain scale, such as 15, 20 million people, things get different. Or in situations where other factors are involved, such as colonialism. These could be like social factors as colonialism or more natural factors. So as scale goes up, things get different, and we have to look for other ideas and other solutions as well. And institutions could be an answer to that. Of course, it's not one size fits all, so not same institutions for same people or same group of people. I mean, ultimately, economical order has ups and downs, especially in the recent history. And we have to understand human nature, get more and more away from understanding. We have in the global economic crisis, they call it irrational exuberance. And psychological motivations basically got in front of the rationality. So of course pretext is also really important in terms of what we are talking about. So we talk about capitalism changing, transforming. Capitalism has all different faces. So from a more agricultural approach, now we got more commercialized approaches and more machinery getting involved. And now we talk about a more financial structure. It's so financial that it has completely lost its touch with reality. So we are actually criticizing financial capitalism here. And financial capitalism, idea of financial built by people, and it has a dark side to it, because people also are not always inclined to do the right thing or find the right way. So at the beginning I mentioned guidance, and we can see that as a spiritual guidance, and that's something that we should be mindful of, otherwise issues will get bigger. And I can give you a lot of references about the diseases brought by financial capitalism, and also I can give you a lot of examples that increase risks and dangers, and these risks and dangers stem from not understanding human nature well. So I can also give a lot of examples on how these things actively make it very difficult for us. Another thing I will say is the question: what is the one thing that makes people and politics and everything uniform, one-sided? And I think that's about debt relations. And especially in the financial capitalism of the last 200 years, debt relations and putting people in debt is an important mechanism. So if you feel indebted to someone or something, you feel grateful to that thing, and all of a sudden you find yourself seeing that thing or a person a role model to yourself. And that may shape how you view the world. So I think this idea of debt is really important, and it's not something that economists only can work on, but capitalism puts people in debt. Of course, there are different factors like wars, conflicts, etc., and this turns into a global model. Yes, of course, trade is in human nature. You get something, you take something, and you give something. Even love is that way. You give love and you receive love. Or other things. For example, you want to share your spiritual belief world with others. Or it's very simple. Let's say you have a feeling, you want to make that feeling bigger, so you want to share it with people so you can grow it. But so we also have to think about colonial past. And I also believe that the capitalism itself is not rising, so things are changing. So this uncertainty and dynamism also could be getting faster and faster by our action. So that's all I can say about this very abstract subject. There are certain other alternatives as well. I'd like to finish with this. In the last 200 years, a lot of Islamic approaches also started as a response to this financial capitalism. For example, looking at the Indian subcontinent and their colonialism past, without considering that past, you can't really understand that the objection that was started in that region. And also, it's also, I think, relates to Muslim's history and also European history as well. So there are differences. And I also would like to say this. We call it heterodox economics. There are different approaches. We also have mainstream economics. And there are a lot of people who say that maybe we are doing something wrong, but I think these alliances also, we should work on our alliances. So the individual experience of Turkey is important, but also looking at the Western world or Far East Asia, Malaysia, Asia, or other areas like Indian continent, etc., we have to include all these geographies in it to benefit from their experiences more.
Thank you for your insightful speech, and I would like to thank all our other participants. And Ehsaas Hoca has another presentation at 11:30, and we can have a couple of questions. And you also, if you have any questions, please tell us which Hoca do you want to question answered by. My name is Sezai Çiçek. I want to ask Ehsaas Hoca, if I did not misunderstood, you said Afghanistan and Iran was examples of success. So was it an economic success, or was it a revolt, a revolution against the politics of the objection of West?
Politik başarı olarak, ekonomik başarı değil. Buyurun.
I have a question to you. You give an example in your brief. In Prophet Muhammad's time, everybody listened to Prophet Muhammad, and there was a good population for Islamic development. But that time there was a very little population, and there was one leader, and that leader gives some brief from Allah. And today there is billion peoples, there is a million leaders, there is a lot of populations. How can we impose this today? My first question is this. Sorry, I have one other question. And in European Union and USA, they were big enemies. They were historical enemies. For example, all European countries 100 years before killing the other ones. But now they have a union. And in USA, there was North and South wars in history, but now they are union. The motivation of this union was capitalism. I think what will be our motivation for our union, for Islamic Union? Thank you.
All right. So to answer the first question, Allah Ta'ala says that this kalam, this is the greatest gift of God to mankind, Allama al-insana ma lam ya'lam, And this ilm is sufficient for a guidance to the day of judgment. So it is not, I mentioned this, that we cannot go back to the state of Medina. We have to make creative adaptation to modernity. But the spirit of Islam is sufficient for our guidance till the Yawm al-Qiyamah. And even right after the Prophet ﷺ's passing away, the Khilafatul Rashidin, they encountered very new circumstances and they made ijtihad, and this has been continuously happening. So today also we need the same kind of ijtihad. And similarly, the patterns of unity that have been created are imaginative. The nation state came into existence by creating a belief in the common identity which didn't exist. So today we have very strong identity narrative in the Quran which tells us that you are one ummah, kuntum khaira ummah. So this is the thing which has to be brought into realization. And just like you said, the European Union, they were enemies and they were become friends. It was not because of economics, it was because of other reasons. And similarly, economic is only one motivation. The spiritual motivation is much stronger. People give their lives for the sake of spiritual motivation. So if that is our motivation to become united, I think that we can.
Thank you. Maalesef süremiz dolduğu için
Unfortunately, we cannot have any more questions because our time is up. And we want to thank our speakers for their insightful presentations. We are going to have a break, then we will continue. Now we would like to thank our hosts. We have the chairman of Istanbul Economic Chamber of and his gifts. The meeting.